Hi, everyone. My name is Barb Kaba. I'm a fourth-generation family farmer from Adair County and a longtime member of Iowa CCI Action. For many years, Iowa CCI Action has lobbied the state legislature for a moratorium on factory farms, along with many other great organizations who are also with us here today, such as Food and Water Watch, Iowa Farmers Union, Sierra Club, Poweshiek CARES, Iowa Citizens for Responsible Agriculture, and Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture. As a farmer and former livestock producer myself, my biggest concern about the factory farm model is its impact on Iowa's water, both the water we drink and the water we fish, swim, and boat in. There are many other negatives to factory farms, but our water supply is something that touches every Iowan. This year, a bill has now been presented in the Iowa legislature to impose a moratorium on the addition of any new factory farms until their overall impact on Iowa can be determined. Here to tell you about this bill is Representative Art Stade of Cedar Rapids.
Thank you for joining us. I am Representative Art Stade, and I represent House District 66 in Lynn County. Today, I'm excited to announce that we have introduced the Factory Farm Moratorium Bill with 19 legislative co-sponsors in the Iowa House. I'd like to take a moment to thank all of the co-sponsors on the bill for standing up for clean water, independent family farmers, and rural communities across Iowa. I would also like to acknowledge the many organizations and individuals who have spent countless hours working across the state on this important issue. For decades, we have been hearing from rural and urban Iowans about the negative impacts of large factory farms. From the corporate control of our food system and the industry's contribution to climate change, to declining property values and the pollution of our rivers, lakes, and streams, the harmful impacts of unregulated corporate agriculture are far-reaching. Whether you live next to a factory farm or downstream from one, all Iowans are affected by the industry. We cannot continue to allow corporate profits to be the priority before our climate, our communities, and our quality of life. We've been listening to Iowans concerned with the industry. We've heard what you've had to say, and we agree. It's time to place a moratorium on the large, new, and expanding factory farms. It's time to revitalize our rural communities. It's time to take care of our soil and our farmers. We can have a food and farm system that empowers farmers, revitalizes our rural communities, and protects our environment, but we cannot get there without moving away from some of the current industrialized practices. We know we will still have a lot of hurdles before we can sign this bill into law. Today's introduction in the Iowa House is only a beginning. We know that with the Republican trifecta, it will be difficult for the legislation to move forward this session, but this bill is bigger than just this session. Iowans have spent decades fighting to get us to this point, and they will continue building momentum behind this policy in the days, months, and years ahead. We know that the Farm Bureau and other large agribusiness interests will fight tooth and nail to uphold the status quo and keep this legislation from being enacted. But the will of Iowans is stronger than that. We have fought uphill battles before. We will not stop until we have a food and farm system that works for us, not against us. Today, we are laying the groundwork for a future in Iowa where our communities, our health, and our climate is put before the interest of multi-billion-dollar corporations. We did not become enveloped in this harmful system of agriculture overnight, and we will not repair our past mistakes by tomorrow. This is a long-term solution where each and every victory leads us closer to a future where our farmers, workers, communities, and our environment are protected from the harms of extractive, corporate-controlled agricultural practices. We're calling on members of the Iowa House to listen to the growing number of Iowans by taking several actions on Factory Farm Moratorium Bill. First, House Majority Leader Representative Pat Grassley needs to assign this bill to the Environmental Protection Committee. Following that, The chair of the committee, Representative Dean Fisher, must assign the bill to a subcommittee ahead of the March 5th funnel deadline. The assigned subcommittee should allow for open public participation. We have ignored this issue for far too long. Iowans deserve to not only see this issue publicly discussed by their elected officials, but also have input into the discussions. And finally, I urge all of my colleagues in both the House and Senate to put the best interests of Iowans first and foremost, and join me in supporting the moratorium on large factory farms. Thank you again for your support and for joining us today.
Thank you, Art, for all the work you're doing for Iowans. Now I'd like to introduce John Gilbert to share his concerns on this issue.
Thank you, Barb. Good afternoon. My name is John Gilbert, and I am glad to be here this afternoon to speak about some of the issues facing our state. I had the extreme good fortune to grow up on a North Iowa dairy and hog farm, where the importance of meshing the cow and the sow was very evident. Those two combined have been the foundation of Midwestern farming almost since the beginning, and is the formula in various forms that has stood our family very well in the 150 years we've been in Hardin County. And it's done and it served us well through the struggles of the 80s, and most times fair and foul since then, to the point today where our 800-acre farm now supports my wife and I, one of my brothers and his wife, and one of our sons and his family. We're here today to talk about legislation addressing hog confinements. And I was asked to talk about the fact that we still raise pigs in a system that doesn't use a confinement. I had the good fortune 23 years ago to be able to sell our pigs into a specialty market, primarily because of the way we'd chosen to raise them. We were using pasture farrowing, we used fresh air housing, bedding, and allowed our pigs to behave naturally, which meant that we didn't have to use antibiotics. Today, several hundred other family farmers are now able to access those markets as well. And the important thing here is that there are alternatives to the industrial confinement system, and most of them are better for the farmer, for the pig, and for getting the value created into the local economies. We raise most of everything we feed. The manure goes back in the fields for the next crop. And when we sell a pig, its value is ours to pay housing, or pay our living expenses, to pay bills, to make improvements on the farm, to pay wages, or in other words, to spend in our local communities. We think that's important. Now, the legislation we're looking at here today deals specifically with hog confinements, but I think we'd be remiss in not realizing that this is about much, much more than just confinements. The Iowa Business Council last week came out with a report that said population decline and a shortage of workers is the biggest impediment to Iowa's future economic well-being. We really need to stop and ask ourselves, what kind of a message are we sending to the rest of the world? Do you want to go to a place that doesn't want to take care of its resources? Do you want to open a business? Do you want to invest your hard-earned money? Do you want to take a job in a place where, as is happening in Iowa, counties are turning their backs on renewable energy, but seeing no problem at all with having unlimited numbers of confinements? When we stop and think about what is really important, we really have a very clear decision to make on this legislation. We can decide whether we want Iowa to grow or whether we're going to be comfortable being just another cultural backwater. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn it over to Carolyn Raffensperger with the Iowa Sierra Club.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Raffensperger, and what an honor to be at this rally today. And I'm situated between two farmers, which is even more wonderful. Thank you, John, for your conversation and your contribution to this really wonderful gathering. And then I'm going to be followed by Jocelyn, another farmer who raises herbs, some of the sacred medicines of the world. So I'm here in the middle to talk about clean water. And I want to greet all of those living beings who depend on clean water for life, all of us. And, you know, the question is, what's the role of government? We're in the middle of quite a debate in this country about what the role of government is. And I would submit to you that the primary function of government is to take care of the things that we share. And central among those is water and clean water. We cannot live without clean water. And, you know, the role of government is to be an instrument for the caring for the public goods. And how important it is in Iowa, which is probably the most ecologically damaged state in the union. It's not probably, it is the most ecologically damaged state in the union. Our dirty water is one of the exhibit A's of the state and our ecological crisis. So government, the responsibility is to care for these waters that we all share and on which our lives depend. And it's time that government stepped up and the state took responsibility for cleaning up the water for all of us so that we can use clean water for all the things that it's necessary for, whether it's drinking, whether it's cooking, whether it's bathing. Our health, our life depends on clean water. The place that government can start is with a moratorium on the confined animal feeding operations, these large industrial hog farms that have no place in the landscape. They contribute to the degradation of our water and of our land and our air. They are ultimately responsible for some of the ill health that we experience. It's time to put a stop to that. You know, there's a corresponding duty that citizens have in democracy, and that is to give or withhold our consent to bad practices. What we're here at this rally today to do is to show that we have withdrawn our consent to permitting confined animal feeding operations and factory farms. They must stop. Our lives depend on it. We have to do what's necessary to protect this land and water, the frogs, all of those creatures that share this land and water with us for this generation and for future generations. Thank you so much for being here and taking action in the next step as a citizen to withdraw your consent from these bad practices and give your consent to clean water. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joss. I have a farm in southeast Iowa. It's the family farm where I grew up. My parents live there, and we were just a mile down the road from my grandma's farm. So basically, I spent all my life in one little corner of Iowa. But growing up there, I've seen a lot of changes come to the neighborhood. And one thing that's definitely changed is a lot of small farmers have sold out, and big farmers have gotten bigger. And then we started seeing like these hog buildings get bigger and bigger. And I didn't think much about it because in a rural community, the one thing you know is that farming is hard. And if we can succeed at it, that's a really good thing. It's important that farmers do well. So yeah, when that first building went in several years ago, it was a mile from our own farm, so it wasn't too bad. There was some smell, but I didn't really think much of it. I mean, I knew the people who put it in. They were the kids from the 4-H club that I grew up with. So we just sort of put up with it. but that building happened to be much closer to my grandma's house, not even a quarter of the mile down the road. And I remember being there one late summer evening, and her windows were open to let in the cool breeze. And I could just smell the odor of hog CAFO manure inside her living room. And it wasn't the smell that I remembered growing up with on the farm. It was more like a sewer smell. It's a weird, undefinable chemical smell. I just remember thinking, I didn't know that hog waste could smell that bad. And I just wanted to get out of there and go home. And I did. And I was happy to get out of there. But it bothered me that my 90-year-old grandma couldn't get out of there because that stench was in her living room. And she was such a great farm wife, my grandma. She was like the perfect community member. She was always bringing an angel food cake to anybody who had a birthday or who was sick. And it didn't feel fair that she was so supportive of other people should be trapped in that living room with that terrible odor for like the last years of her life. And I knew she didn't like it because one time she said something about it. And when an Iowa farm woman complains about something, it really has to be bothering them because Iowa farm women don't complain. But I never really said anything about it because it was hard to shake the feeling that I was too young and it wasn't my place. And I didn't want to disrupt the community. And I didn't want to think that like anything a farmer could do could like hurt some other member of the community. So I just sort of stayed silent. And then my grandma got a respiratory disease and summer infection, and she went to the emergency room and she didn't come home again. And I remember at her funeral, I met a friend who my grandmother had helped when his mom was sick. And he said, I can't believe you never said anything about that hog building next to your grandma. I would have thought that you would have helped her. And that's when I realized like I wasn't the only one who in our community who was concerned about the CAFO. And I decided to do some research on it because I have a graduate degree in chemistry. And meanwhile, more and more of these hog buildings with thousands of hogs were going up just within this tiny area of rural Iowa. So I read the studies on them and I found that there were studies and they weren't good. And they were like, this CAFO manure, it's not regular manure. There are toxins in there. It gets in the air. It's been linked to things like nerve damage and headaches and nausea and respiratory disease. And that last one kind of really hit hard when I read that because my grandma had really terrible respiratory troubles in her last years of her life. And I can remember her wheezing and just struggling to breathe and being trapped in that smelly living room. And I'm really sorry now that I didn't speak up sooner. And I'm also really sorry now because there's even more of these CAFO buildings around that house. And now my grandmother's gone, but my 75-year-old father lives there. And I just think it's time that I have to start speaking up. And it's time that the other people like me who are concerned for rural Iowans who are being hurt by these buildings, I think it's time that we support them. And that's why I'm here today, to support this moratorium on the CAFOs. I think it's really what rural Iowa needs. And now I'm going to pass this off to Emma of Food and Water Watch, and she's going to share about how you can help stand up and help support this moratorium because there are rural Iowans out there who need your help and need your support of this moratorium.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for that. Hey, folks. My name is Emma Schmidt, and I'm an organizer for Food and Water Watch based in Northwest Iowa. Now, I've got to give it up to all the jazzy speakers who went before me, although it is clear that they saved the best for last. Best at what? I am not sure. My mother always said I was a late bloomer. It's why I had to drop out of band in high school. I was such a late bloomer, I still hadn't learned how to keep a beat on the triangle after 5 years. But that's neither here nor there. What is here, there, and everywhere is factory farms. Now, all the speakers that you've heard from today laid out some of the most critical problems with the factory farm industry. But we'd be here for a month if we discussed each and every negative aspect of the industry. And unfortunately, I've only got 3 minutes. So without a second to spare, I'm going to share with y'all what we're going to do to release our food and farm system from the death grip of corporate ag. First, we're going to build a movement of everyday people ready to fight like hell for their communities, climate, and quality of life. Oh, wait, check mark, already done. Give yourself a pat on the back, way to be a team player. Second, we're going to introduce legislation to enact a moratorium on factory farms. By golly, look at us go, Speed Racer. We can cross that one off the list too. Next, we're going to get that bill signed into law so we can begin building a food and farm system that works for us, not against us. This is where things get a little tricky. See, even though we all know that our current industrialized model of agriculture isn't sustainable, not for farmers, not for consumers, and certainly not for the environment, some individuals would rather prioritize short-term profits over the public good. For example, House Speaker Patrick Grassley. His failure to assign the moratorium bill to the Environmental Protection Committee surely isn't related to the over $1.5 million he, his father, and his grandfather have received in subsidy payments. Subsidies that wouldn't exist if we had an agricultural system that actually works. So, later this week, we're going to remind Speaker Grassley that he was elected to represent the will of the people, not his own selfish interests or those of other industry fat cats. And we aren't going to stop there. Oh, no. We've come this far and we aren't turning back. Nope. Not when our right to clean water is being tossed away. Not when factory farm Goliaths like Tyson would rather our families and friends die than provide adequate safeguards against a global pandemic. Not when the once thriving agricultural-based rural communities across the state can't even give their residents a damn grocery store, let alone feed the world. No, we have put up with enough. We aren't going to back down until we have a food and farm system that provides farmers a living wage, protects workers, preserves our environment, and paves the way forward to a better future. Whether it's this year or in 5 years, we are going to keep pushing until we see a moratorium on factory farms enacted. We will elect new leaders who care about their constituents. We will topple the control of massive agribusinesses like Farm Bureau and the pork producers. We will stop the destruction of our communities, our health, and our quality of life. And I can't wait to get started. So let's quit talking about it and get to work.